My name is Edward Cole, and I'm 72 years old. I've always loved Christmas. The lights, the smell of pine, the songs that loop through the radio like old friends. For 30 years, I invited family to a simple dinner on Christmas Eve. Roast, mashed potatoes, my wife June stuffing, and a table crowded with the kind of noise that makes a house feel like a home. This year, I mailed out the invitations early and addressed envelopes like I used to. I even tucked in a little note that said, "Come for dinner? Please." I thought that would be enough. But when people choose to ignore an invitation, they also choose to show you who they've become. A week before Christmas, I saw the RSVP pile up. A few yeses, some regrets, and then a blank from the two names that mattered. Most of my son, Matthew, and his wife, Claire. I called and left a polite voicemail. "Hope to see you both. It won't be the same without you." No return call. I texted. I got a read receipt and nothing more. The silence felt like a small slap, then a cold realization. They had decided their holiday would be better without me. I pictured them clinking glasses at their own table, laughing while my chair at home sat empty. Sometimes the silence of someone you love speaks louder than any insult. I tried not to let it fester. I asked neighbors. I checked in with friends. They said Matthew and Claire had been busy, new jobs, new friends, new lives. "They'll come," people said, but I knew the difference between busy and choosing. Choosing stung because it's intentional. On a December afternoon, I folded the invitation back into its envelope and placed it on the mantel beside June's picture. Her face looked at me like she always had, patient, kind, disappointed on my behalf. I put my hand over the frame and whispered, "They'll learn. What people refuse today often becomes a lesson they learn tomorrow." The week before Christmas, I watched their house's lights go up from my window across the street. It was nicer this year, a new string of bulbs, a rented tree truck parked in the driveway. I imagined their party list, the people they wanted to impress, the food tray orders. Somewhere in the noise and sparkle, there was no thought for the man who'd driven them to soccer practice, fixed their bikes at midnight, and helped them move when their first apartment flooded. I felt something rise in me that wasn't anger. Yet it was a cold clarity, the kind that sharpens the mind after a long hurt. Sometimes clarity comes wrapped in disappointment, and it has its own kind of power. I could have called and begged. I could have shown up on their doorstep with pie and a smile, forgiven and forgotten. But June always used to say, "Don't lose your dignity to get their smiles." She was right. I wasn't going to bargain for a place at their table when their choice to decline said everything. Instead, I decided to answer their silence with a question. If they could ignore me, what would it cost them to be forgotten? I folded my hands on the kitchen table, looked at the old calendar page marked with decades of family dinners, and started to plan something quiet, thoughtful, and perfectly fitting. Revenge doesn't have to be loud to be permanent. Sometimes it's wrapped and mailed. So primera preparé the Christmas gift, but not the kind anyone would expect. I scheduled it carefully, wrote the address clearly, and entrusted it to the postal service with a small note that read, "From someone who remembers the table." The package was simple on the outside, heavy enough inside to make curiosity grow. I didn't want to destroy them, and I never wanted this to become a scene. I wanted a lesson folded into paper and ribbon, a reminder that actions have consequences, and that choosing to ignore those who gave you everything can come with a cost of its own. Because sometimes the best lessons arrive in quiet boxers that ring the loudest bell of alcohol. On Christmas Eve, while their house hummed with music and the clink of glasses, my gift was on its way. I sat in my living room with a single candle flickering, June's picture lit by its glow, and felt oddly calm. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was a peaceful certainty that when people choose to treat others as if they don't matter, Life has ways of rearranging the table. I didn't know how they would react. I only knew that I would sleep that night, with my dignity intact, and a small hope that my simple act would remind them what they given up. Because sometimes the truest gifts aren't what you hand them, they what you help them see. Christmas morning came slow that year. The sun was weak, its light stretching over snow like a tired smile. I woke up early, out of habit more than excitement. Old men don't sleep late on holidays. We wake up to memories. The tree in my living room was small, the kind you buy when the house has grown to quiet. I brewed my coffee, poured it into my favorite chipped mug, the one June gave me in '92 that says best dad in the world, and sat by the window. From across the street, I could see Matthew's house, glowing in gold lights and laughter that spilled out like it owned the world. I watched their driveway glisten with the reflections of expensive cars. My gift, though, was already there, sitting neatly by their front door, wrapped in red paper with silver ribbon. Some gifts don't sparkle under the tree, they wait outside until the truth unwraps them. The delivery was timed perfectly. I arranged for it to arrive early, before anyone else woke up. I didn't need them to see me or even know it came from my hand. Inside that box was an angerit. It was a quiet message wrapped in consequence. It held documents, so memorious, and something far more meaningful. The deed to their house. What they never knew was that I still co-owned it. Years ago, when Matthew needed help buying his dream home, I had written the first check, but his signature had never replaced mine. I still had partial ownership, so when they decided to ignore me, I decided to return the favor legally, gracefully, and silently. Because sometimes the loudest I remember is written in ink, not words. They hadn't read the fine print. The same house they'd decorated, filled with guests, and flaunted on social media, still had my name quietly sitting in the county records. Over the years, I paid the property tax without mentioning I'd part of a father's love, I told myself. But after they froze me out of their lives, I called my lawyer and made sure everything was ready. Inside that box, along with old family photos and a note that said, "Merry Christmas, remember where this home began," was a letter from my attorney. It detailed the new terms. I had sold my share to a community trust. It wasn't theirs anymore. Not fully. The trust intended to repurpose it for local housing once their lease expired. Karma doesn't shout. It signs quietly and waits for the calendar to turn. That morning, I imagined the moment they'd unwrap it, Claire's manicured fingers pulling off the ribbon. Matthew's confident smile fading as he read the words. I didn't need to be there to see it. I could already picture his face turning pale, his hand trembling as he skimmed through the letter from my lawyer. Claire would ask, "What does it mean?" And he'd stammer something like, He sold it. And in that moment, she would realize that the man they ignored over dinner had just changed their address without saying a single word. People often forget that the ones they dismiss still hold the keys to the very doors they walk through every day. I didn't celebrate, though. There was no victory dance, no toast to myself. I just sat quietly with my coffee and listened to the world go on around me. Outside, children played with their new sleds. Neighbors laughed, and a car radio somewhere played Silent Night. My version of Silent Night felt different. Not bitter, just full of closure. I took a deep breath, felt the warmth of the coffee mug in my hands, and said softly to June's photo on the mantel, "I hope you see what I did." I didn't get angry. I just reminded them who helped them build their happiness. True revenge is never about destruction. It's about correction. By afternoon, my phone started buzzing. It was Matthew. The first time he'd called me in months, he let it ring. He tried again. And again. The silence between us suddenly became louder than all the carols outside. He left a voicemail. "Dad, we got your gift." "What is this? We need to talk." His tone wasn't angry, it was scared. That was new. For years, I was the one reaching out, the one left waiting for a reply. Now, he was the one chasing. I turned off the phone, placed it face down on the table, and smiled faintly. Sometimes life turns the tables so you can finally see what it feels like to be served the same silence you once received. Later that evening, I watched from my porch as they opened their front door. Still in a state of disbelief, I saw Matthew pacing back and forth in their living room, phone pressed to his ear, and Claire clutching the papers. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. But then I remembered the years of exclusion, the birthdays missed, the calls unanswered, and the way he'd said, "We're too busy." Dad. That phrase had cut deeper than anything else. Busy. Too busy for the man who taught him everything he knew. Now, suddenly, he had time to talk. Regret always clears its schedule when truth shows up uninvited. That night, I took one last walk through the snowy street, breathing in the crisp air that stung just enough to make me feel alive. I didn't need their apology. I just wanted the balance restored. As I reached my porch, I glanced one last time at their window. Their Christmas tree lights flickered not bright, but uneasy. My heart was steady. For the first time in years, I felt like Christmas had meaning again. Not because I gave them pain, but because I reclaimed my peace. Sometimes giving back means taking back what's rightfully yours and nothing more. The next morning, the world outside looked untouched fresh, snow covering everything like forgiveness waiting to happen. But in my Solness house across the street, there was no forgiveness, only panic. From my window I could see the tension in the way Matthew stormed out to his car, papers in, and phone pressed to his ear. He was probably calling his lawyer, or maybe me again. He looked smaller somehow, like a boy caught doing something wrong, but too proud to admit it. The kind of pride that doesn't bend until it breaks. When pride finally cracks, the sound it makes is often the beginning of understanding. My phone buzzed again. Another message. "Dad, we need to fix this. You can't just do this to us." I didn't reply. For decades, I'd been a fixer, the one who patched holes, covered mistakes, and paid bills when things fell apart. But fixing for them had turned into enabling them. They had learned comfort, not gratitude. And that is a dangerous thing to teach your children, that they can take and take without ever giving back. So I let the phone buzz until it stopped. I poured another cup of coffee, sat back in my armchair, and let silence be my answer. Sometimes silence is the sharpest tool of all. It carves humility where words never could. It helps more than you know. Take care. A few hours later, a knock echoed at my door. I knew who it would be. When I opened it, Matthew stood there, no jacket, just a sweater. His eyes frantic, his cheeks red from the cold. Behind him, Claire sat in the car, pretending to look at her phone, but her nervous glances gave her away. "Dad, can we talk?" he said, his voice trembling somewhere between anger and desperation. I nodded slowly and stepped aside to let him in. He walked into my modest living room, a place he hadn't visited in 2 years, and looked around. "It's smaller than I remember," he muttered. That one sentence told me everything I needed to know. People who outgrow gratitude often find their characters shrinking while their egos grow taller. He started pacing back and forth. "You can't just sell the house. We have our savings in that place, Dad. That's our home." I listened quietly, letting him vent. When he finally paused for breath, I said softly, "No, son, was our home." The words landed like a truth he didn't know how to hold. He blinked at me, as if searching for a loophole in a feeling. "You're punishing me," he finally said. I smiled faintly. "No, I'm reminding you." I pointed to a photo on my mantelpiece, one from when he was 8 years old. holding a toy train, his face lit up by the same Christmas tree we once shared. You see that picture? Back then, you knew what a gift meant. It meant thought, effort, and love, not entitlement. When people mistake love for an obligation, sometimes the only way to remind them is to stop giving. He slumped into a chair, his confidence evaporating. Claire's furious, he mumbled. She says you embarrassed her family. I couldn't help but chuckle softly. Embarrassed? Son, I didn't send that gift to her. I sent it to you. It was to remind you who built the ground you stand on. I looked up, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. He had no defense because, deep down, he knew the truth. Everything he had was built on borrowed generosity. I leaned forward, my tone calm but heavy. I taught you to earn your keep, Matthew. But somewhere along the way, you started thinking family was a ladder to climb instead of a home to cherish. When the truth finally hits, it doesn't shatter. It settles like snow, quiet, but permanent. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked, the fire crackled, and I could feel the distance between us, measured not in feet, but in years. Then I said something I hadn't said in a long time. You know, I miss your mother every day. She believed Christmas was about gratitude, about remembering who stood with you when no one else did. You and Claire forgot that. His eyes softened just a little, but his pride kept him from saying the words that needed to come next. Instead, he stood up. We'll fight this, he declared. I nodded. You can try, but remember, you can't fight for something that was never truly yours to begin with. When a man has to defend what he once took for granted, the battle is already lost. He left without another word. The front door closed, and the air felt heavier for a moment, then clearer. I sat down and stared at my late wife June's picture again. You'd be proud, I whispered. I didn't raise my voice once. Outside, I saw him drive away fast, tires spinning, his ego dragging behind him like exhaust smoke. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter. The kind of lightness that comes when you stop carrying the weight of someone else's disrespect. Peace doesn't always arrive with forgiveness. Sometimes it walks in the door right after you've let go. Later that night, I received one final message from him. You win, Dad. It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough. I didn't reply. Instead, I placed my phone down, turned off the light, and let the quiet fill the room. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the forgotten one. I felt seen not by him, but by life itself. Because I hadn't destroyed his world. I'd only removed my contribution from it, and that's what real justice looks like. The balance restored without a single shout. The next morning, I mailed one last letter, not to him, but to the community trust. I increased my donation, asking them to use the proceeds from my share of the house to help single parents in town find homes for the holidays. That way, the house my son failed to value could help families who still understood what togetherness truly meant. June would have loved that. Sometimes, the best revenge is when your loss becomes someone else's blessing. By New Year's Day, the neighborhood had changed its lights from red and green to white and gold. People were looking forward to fresh starts, new goals, and new promises. But across the street, my son's house looked different. The lights were still on, but they seemed dim, as if their brightness couldn't find a reason anymore. Cars came and went. I noticed Claire's parents visiting one morning. They stayed for barely 20 minutes. When they left, they didn't hug Matthew at the door like they usually did. Their smiles were stiff, their faces pale. Something was unraveling inside that house. When the people who once admired you start leaving in silence, you know that pride has finally begun to collapse. The new year began with a silence, not the kind that comes from loneliness, but the kind that carries weight, the silence of realization. I hadn't heard from Matthew or Claire since I sent that Christmas gift. I didn't expect to. People who live for pride rarely open boxers wrapped in truth. But I knew, one way or another, that small envelope would find its way into their conscience. After all, karma doesn't rush, it arrives exactly when you've stopped waiting for it. I didn't have to ask around. News travels fast in a small town. My neighbor, Mrs. Watson, mentioned over the fence that Matthew's company was under pressure. A missed payment, an investor backing out. I simply nodded, keeping my thoughts to myself. I'd seen this before, not just in business, but in people. When someone builds too much on appearances, the weight of their own image starts to crush them. It was never my goal to ruin them. But sometimes, when you remove the foundation of gratitude, the rest just falls apart on its own. A few days later, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a short note from Clara. It said, "We're sorry for how things turned out. We didn't mean to hurt you." No signature. No warmth, just guilt and handwriting. I sat there, reading those words over and over. I wanted to feel comfort, but all I felt was distance. An apology written out of fear isn't healing. It's just damage control. I placed the note beside a pile of other forgotten letters. Not every apology deserves an answer. Some are meant to echo until the heart that wrote them learns to listen. That evening, I took a walk past their house. The Christmas decorations had been taken down, replaced by a for sale sign staked into the frozen lawn. I stood quietly, the cold biting my cheeks, watching snow gather at its base. Claire came out onto the porch. For a brief second, our eyes met. She didn't wave or smile. She just looked ashamed. I gave her a polite nod and kept walking. I wasn't angry anymore. That small gesture said everything I needed it to. Later that night, I sat by my fireplace, sipping tea and staring into the flames. I thought about my late wife, June, and how she always found peace in doing the right thing, even when it hurt. I could almost hear her saying, "Edward, don't let their mistakes make you bitter." She was right. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about release. I had let go of what I couldn't change and turned my pain into purpose. The money from that property sale was already helping 3 families move into new homes that winter. That thought warmed me more than the fire ever could. Goodness, when redirected from pain, can heal places that revenge never can. A few weeks later, Matthew called again. This time, I answered. His voice was softer, worn down. "Dad," he said quietly. "I just wanted to say, you were right." There was no anger left in him, only a tired truth. I didn't gloat. I just said, "I wasn't trying to be right, son. I was trying to remind you." There was a long pause on the line, the kind where words fail but hearts begin to mend. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I miss Mom. I think she would have been disappointed in me." I closed my eyes and replied, "She would have been proud that you realized that. When humility finally speaks, love always listens." We talked for a long time that night, about nothing and everything, old memories. His mother's laugh when snow got in her hair. It wasn't a full repair, but it was a beginning. The next morning, he showed up at my door. No papers, no anger. Just a box of pastries and 2 coffees. We sat together in a peaceful silence. He finally said, "I didn't realize how much I hurt you until I felt forgotten too." I nodded, smiling faintly. "Now you know how I felt every Christmas you didn't show up. Sometimes it takes losing warmth to recognize how cold you've become." He stayed for hours, helping me fix the old shelf June used to decorate every December. When he left, he hugged me, the first real hug in years. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. That moment spoke for itself. As he walked out the door, I whispered quietly, "Merry late Christmas, son." He turned back, his eyes watery, and smiled. "Best gift I've ever received. When you stop chasing revenge, You make room for redemption to walk in quietly. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time since June passed. Revenge gave me clarity. Forgiveness gave me peace. Both came from remembering my worth. I closed the journal and placed it by the window, where moonlight fell across the page. It wasn't about victory anymore. It was about closure. Because in the end, I didn't need them to pay. I just needed them to remember. And sometimes, memory is the longest-lasting form of justice. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe and join me for more reflections. See you next time. A few weeks later, the first sign came. I was reading the morning paper when I saw a small headline on the business page. Matthews & Co. faces internal audit after irregularities found. My breath caught. The company was Matthew's pride, his entire world. It was his reason for ignoring family dinners, for treating me like an old, unimportant man. But now that world was cracking, and I hadn't lifted a finger. I simply let truth walk in through the front door. When you plant honesty, time waters it for you. I didn't take pleasure in it. Not exactly. Watching someone fall never feels good, even when they pushed you first. But there was a deep calm in knowing that life has its own balance. Matthew had always looked down on me, convinced that my quiet life made me weak. Yet here I was, with peace in my hands, while he was learning what chaos felt like. The strongest man in the room is often the one who doesn't need to raise his voice. Claire called me 2 weeks later. Her tone was fragile, her words cautious. "Edward," she said, "we got your gift." For a second I thought she meant the audit notice, but then she added softly, "The envelope, the one you sent for Christmas." I stayed quiet. She continued, "Inside, there was a letter. It wasn't about money. It was about family." My heart softened. She'd read it. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can send is the truth wrapped in kindness. She told me that after reading it, Matthew had gone quiet for days. He barely spoke, barely slept. He'd realized that every decision he made had been guided by ego, not love. "He's different now," she said. "He's trying to make things right." I didn't know whether to believe her, but I wanted to. "I hope he does." "Claire," I said gently, "for his own sake. Regret is the first step toward redemption, but only if you walk the rest of the way." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't over. A few days later, a hand-delivered letter appeared in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was a check for $20,000 and a note in Matthew's handwriting. Asterisk for the Christmas dinner we missed. Thank you for reminding me what matters. Asterisk. I stared at it for a long time before tearing the check in half. I didn't need his money. I needed him to remember that love can't be bought, and forgiveness can't be written on a check. When you stop chasing payback, you start collecting peace. That night, I took a walk through the neighborhood. The houses were still dressed in leftover Christmas lights, glowing faintly in the cold. Families laughed behind windows, clinking mugs of cocoa, talking about their plans for the year ahead. I smiled quietly. I'd spent so long feeling forgotten, and yet now, I realized I'd never been alone. The world is full of people who lose touch, drift apart, and then find their way back when the heart grows tired of pride. Sometimes, the best revenge is showing them what peace looks like without them. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee, I got another call, this time from Matthew himself. His voice was shaky, but honest. "Dad," he said softly, "I owe you an apology. I was blinded by things that didn't matter. You were right about everything." I didn't interrupt him. I just listened. When he finished, I said quietly, "The only apology I ever needed was this call." There was a long silence on the line, followed by a choked, "Thank you." Some victories don't come with applause, they come with tears on the other end of a phone. In the days that followed, something shifted. Matthew started showing up not for gifts or favors, but just to sit with me. Sometimes he brought coffee, sometimes groceries, and sometimes nothing at all. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. Tere? Tere. It's a quiet understanding between fathers and sons, when words finally run out and love finds its way back through small gestures. When time heals, it doesn't erase it, rewrites the story with softer ink. I noticed Claire had changed too. She used to walk into a room like she owned it. Now, she entered gently, with gratitude in her eyes. One afternoon, as we were cleaning up after lunch, she looked at me and said, "You know, that letter you sent, it changed him. It changed us." I smiled faintly. "Letters don't change people," I said. "Realization does." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "You can't teach humility, but life can." I knew then that my Christmas gift had done exactly what it was meant to do. It wasn't revenge. It was revelation. A mirror held up to their own choices, and as much as it hurt to admit, maybe they needed to lose a piece of themselves to find what really mattered. Justice doesn't always shout, sometimes it whispers truth through the cracks of regret. Winter began to fade, and with it, the sharpness of everything that had hurt me. The snow melted off the roof, dripping into the soil like time itself, softening old memories. I found myself spending mornings on the porch again, coughing in and watching the street come alive. I didn't wait for calls anymore. I didn't stare at the phone hoping someone would think of me. I had learned that peace begins where expectations end. You stop waiting for people when you realize you were never waiting, you were healing. One morning, as I sat there, I saw Matthew's car pull into the driveway. It was strange. I hadn't expected him. He stepped out carrying a cardboard box, nothing fancy, just something he'd clearly packed himself. Inside were photo albums, old letters, and a few of June's favorite ornaments. "I found these in storage," he said quietly. "Thought maybe you'd want them back." I took the box without speaking. I didn't need to ask why he suddenly cared. The timing told me everything guilt had become gratitude. When people return what they once dismissed, it's not about the things, it's about the meaning they finally saw in them. Thank you so much for joining me for this story. If it resonated with you, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. It means the world. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. We sat for a long while, looking through those photos. June, smiling at everyone, her hair catching the sun, her arms always around us. Matthew's eyes lingered on one picture, him as a boy, sitting on my shoulders at the lake. "I used to think you were the strongest man in the world," he said softly. I smiled. "You weren't wrong. I just didn't use that strength the way you expected." He nodded slowly, a quiet understanding passing between us. Sometimes it takes losing your footing to realize whose shoulders held you steady all along. In the weeks that followed, Matthew began coming by more often. Not every day, but enough that the silence between visits no longer felt like distance. He'd help with small things, fixing the fence, repainting the porch, cleaning the gutters. Nothing extraordinary. But every act felt like an apology without words. One afternoon, as we were trimming the hedges, he said, "You know, Dad, I used to think your calmness was weakness." I chuckled. "And now?" He smiled faintly. "Now I think it's the only strength worth having. There is a kind of power in peace that can be faked because it comes from surviving the noise." Claire came to sometimes, bringing meals or flowers. She'd talk softly, her tone free of the sharpness it once carried. She told me about their decision to sell the house, to move somewhere quieter, start fresh. "We realized we were chasing things that didn't mean anything," she said. "We thought money would make life easy. Turns out, it just made it loud. Primera, not that silence can teach you more than success ever will. Some lessons, Dante, come from failure. They come from listening to what your heart ignored for too long. The town started to notice the change in Matthew. People who once saw him as arrogant began to describe him as humble, grounded. He started donating his time, helping local families through the same community center I'd been a part of for years. He didn't make grand gestures. He simply showed up. I remember one evening, watching him hand out food boxers with a quiet smile. No cameras, no pride, just peace. I didn't need to say anything. I just watched, feeling something inside me settle for good. Karma doesn't humiliate. It educates. On my 71st birthday, they surprised me with a small gathering at my house. Nothing extravagant. Just family, neighbors, and a few friends. There was laughter, the smell of homemade pie, and soft music playing from an old radio. Matthew raised his glass and said, "To my father, the man who taught me that silence can be the loudest truth." The room went quiet, and for a moment, I felt June there too. I looked around and realized that the gift ID sent months ago wasn't just a letter. It was a seed, and this moment was its bloom. Sometimes revenge ends with a smile, not a tear. After everyone left, I sat alone by the window, staring at the lights flickering across the snow. My heart was full, but not heavy. I thought back to that Christmas when I sat waiting for a call that never came. It felt like a different life, another man's pain. Now, I had no bitterness left, only gratitude. The people who once ignored me had found their way back, not because I demanded it, but because truth guided them there. You don't win by getting even, you win by staying kind long enough for them to see who they became without you. Later that night, I opened my old journal when I used to write in when I felt invisible. I flipped to the page where ID written months ago. They forgot me this Christmas. Beneath it, I added a new line, but I remembered myself. I smiled. The pen felt lighter now, as if even the ink was at peace. Spring rolled in like a soft apology from the earth itself. The snow that had once mirrored my loneliness melted into rivers that carried away everything cold. The air smelled of new beginnings, and the birds outside my porch sang songs I hadn't heard in years. For the first time in a long while, my home didn't feel empty, it felt earned. When you stop needing revenge, you start noticing how beautiful peace sounds. Matthew came by more often now. Not to fix things or make grand speeches, but just to be around. Sometimes he'd mow the lawn or help replace a light bulb. One afternoon, he came carrying a small wooden box. "Dad," he said, "I made this for you." Inside was a handcrafted clock, simple, sturdy, with my initials carved on the back. "To remind you that time's still ours," he said quietly. I held it for a long moment, tracing the edges, and felt something loosen inside me. Sometimes the truest apology isn't spoken, it's built with your own hands. Claire, too, had soft. She'd invite me over for dinner once a week, always insisting that I bring nothing. Her once perfect home now smelled of real food, the kind made with effort, not pride. During one of those dinners, she looked across the table and said, "You know, Edward, I used to think you sent that gift to punish us." She smiled faintly. "Now I know you sent it to save us." I nodded and said, "Sometimes people only hear love when it arrives in disguise. Lessons wrapped in pain are the ones we never forget." I began volunteering again at the community shelter, the one June and I used to support before she passed. The people there didn't care who I was or what I owned. They just saw an old man willing to help. I spent my days serving meals, fixing shelves, and listening to stories from strangers who'd lost everything yet still smiled wider than most millionaires. That is when I realized something profound. My so-called gift wasn't about revenge at all. It was about reminding the world, and myself, that giving back always returns to you in ways you can't predict. Karma isn't punishment. It's education delivered gently by time. Thank you for listening to my story. One afternoon, I received a letter from the Community Foundation. The same trust ID transferred part of my assets 2 years ago. They were naming a new family wing after my late wife, June. For her kindness, the letter said, and for the legacy her husband helped continue. My hands trembled as I read those words. I could almost hear her laugh echoing through the years, proud and soft. In that moment, it felt like life itself was nodding back at me, whispering, "You did it right." Some rewards don't come in the form of money, they arrive as peace, filling the space where pain once lived. As summer arrived, my son Matthew visited with his daughter, my granddaughter, Emma. As soon as she saw me, she ran into my arms, shouting, "Grandpa." It was the first time I'd heard that word from her lips. She handed me a drawing she'd made. The three of us holding hands under a Christmas tree. "Mommy said this is our second Christmas," she giggled. I smiled, realizing she was right. The first one, just a few months ago, had been built on distance and uncertainty. This one was built on understanding. When the next generation calls your name with love, you know the cycle is finally healed. That evening, after they'd gone home, I sat on the porch, watching the sky fade from orange to gold. The air carried the distant laughter of neighbors, the familiar smell of barbecues, and the quiet hum of contentment. My mind drifted back to that lonely Christmas night. The suffocating silence, the pain, the box ID left on their doorstep end. How it had all led me to this very moment. I realized I didn't just send them a gift that night. I sent them a reminder that love, when ignored, can become love reclaimed, but only when the heart is finally ready to listen. Sometimes, the most powerful message isn't shouted. It's delivered in the quiet calm that settles between heartbreak and forgiveness. Before heading inside, I wound the beautiful old clock Matthew had made for me. Its gentle, rhythmic ticking filled the living room, sounding like a steady heartbeat. I realized that every second it marked wasn't just time passing, it was proof of time healed. I whispered into the quiet, "June, we did it." They finally learned. The clock ticked on, steady and faithful, as if agreeing with me. It made me think that true revenge isn't about payback. It ends when peace begins to tell the story for you. As autumn crept in again, I marveled at how quietly the world moves on after pain has been forgiven. The leaves fell, golden and fragile, but so beautiful in their surrender. I would sit by the window each morning, the same window I once stared out of alone on Christmas Eve. But now, I felt a warmth that didn't come from the sun. It came from the peace inside me, the kind that doesn't need an audience to feel complete. I learned that in the end, peace isn't something that's given to you. You have to earn it by walking through the fire without letting it burn your soul. One evening, just as the sky turned a deep violet, Matthew came by with Emma. He brought no gifts, no grand explanations, just dinner and easy laughter. We sat at the same table that had once been hauntingly empty, the same table I'd once desperately hoped they'd return to. But this time there was no pretending, no lingering guilt, no stubborn pride. There was only understanding. Emma chattered about her school. His wife Claire told stories about her new job, and Matthew just watched me with a quiet smile that said everything words couldn't. When love returns uninvited, that's when you know it's truly real. After dinner, Matthew handed me a small, wrapped box. Inside was a framed photo of the three of us sitting together last Christmas. The first one, after everything had changed. Underdated, a simple, handwritten message. "You are the gift." "Dad." My throat tightened, my eyes blurred, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry. Not tears of regret, but of overwhelming gratitude. I had spent months wondering if my actions had been right, whether the Christmas gift I'd sent had healed or hurt them. Now, I finally had my answer. The best revenge is never about getting even. It's about leaving something better behind you. When they left that night, I stayed by the fire, the photograph resting in my lap. The house felt full again, not with noise, but with a sense of belonging. I whispered into the stillness, "June, you were right all along. Family always finds its way home, even through the coldest winters." The fire crackled softly in reply. Maybe that was her answer. Maybe that was all I needed to hear. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It redeems Italiano. As I turned out the lights and climbed the stairs, I passed the shelf where the old Christmas ornaments sat, the ones I hadn't used in years. I picked one up, a faded wooden angel Emma had made for me in preschool, and hung it near the window. Its tiny wings caught the soft glow of the porch light, and for a moment, the whole room seemed to breathe again. The years of silence, of pride and loneliness, had all led to this a home, not just rebuilt, but reborn. Karma doesn't destroy, it teaches, and if you listen closely, it whispers how to start over. I went to bed that night with a single thought echoing in my mind. The line I had written in that Christmas letter months ago: "Love ignored becomes love remembered, once it's too late." But as I lay there, I realized it wasn't too late. My son had learned. My family had come home. And I had learned that the greatest gift we can ever give is UNT wrapped in fancy paper or sealed with perfect ribbons. It's wrapped in understanding, forgiveness, and time. And that was the real Christmas gift. Because sometimes the story doesn't end with revenge, it ends with redemption. Thank you so much for watching and for being a part of this journey. If this story touched your heart, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It means the world to me. We'll see you in the next one.